It was a blistering late summer afternoon when I first dragged the cardboard boxes out of my pickup and set them on the lawn. The heat shimmered across the quiet suburban street, but the calm didn't last. Out of nowhere, a woman in a loud floral dress stormed across the grass, clutching a crumpled notice. Her voice cut through the neighborhood like a siren. "You can't live here. This is my community." Curtains twitched. Neighbors peeked out. I just smirked. The paper was fake. Karen was about 50. Her bleached blonde hair teased into a stiff helmet that didn't move even in the breeze. Her heavily powdered face couldn't hide the sharp wrinkles carved deep by years of scowling. She wore a floral dress so loud it seemed to fight the sunlight, accented by a red silk scarf and an oversized gold bracelet that jingled with every dramatic gesture. Her eyes were restless, scanning like a predator, always looking for someone to dominate. I, on the other hand, was 45, tall and lean, with short cropped black hair and a sun-weathered face that blended easily into the crowd. A faded light blue shirt, simple jeans, and an old military watch on my wrist were my only identifiers. Quiet, reserved at least at first glance. To her, I was an intruder. To me, she was just another bully. But who should really be afraid? The first sign that Karen would not be a temporary annoyance came the very next morning. I was sitting on my porch, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug, trying to enjoy the quiet hum of cicadas and the faint smell of fresh-cut grass. The calm was broken when Karen marched across my lawn like she owned it, a folder clutched in her hand. Without so much as a greeting, she dropped a stack of papers onto my patio table with a slap that rattled my cup. "These are your violation notices," she announced, her voice shrill enough to carry down the street. I picked up the top sheet, studying the crooked font, the misspelled signatures, and the letterhead that looked like it had been pieced together on a school computer. My lips twitched. "Karen, my property isn't in your HOA," I said evenly. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw the flicker of frustration that would only grow brighter. 2 days later, I noticed the shift in the air. Neighbors who had waved at me before now crossed to the other side of the street. A woman pulling her dog avoided eye contact altogether, tugging the leash as if proximity alone might contaminate her. That evening, while carrying groceries into the kitchen, I overheard hushed whispers drifting from the hedge. "I heard he's an ex-con," something about financial fraud. The words were delivered with the eager tone of people who relish gossip more than truth. The sting of their judgment pressed against my chest, though I masked it with a bitter chuckle. I knew where this was coming from. Karen had gone from fake paperwork to character assassination. It wasn't just about discrediting me. It was about erasing me from the neighborhood's social fabric before I ever had a chance to belong. I poured myself a stiff drink that night, staring at the blank walls of my new home. It was supposed to be a fresh start, yet here I was, already cast as the villain in someone else's play. The third act of her campaign came with more flair. Karen loved an audience. At the monthly HOA meeting, held in the overly air-conditioned community hall, she took the stage in her floral dress like a queen addressing her court. Though my property was not under her jurisdiction, she made sure I was present, calling me out in front of 30 neighbors. "This man," she declared, pointing a manicured finger in my direction, "is ruining our neighborhood's beauty. Have you seen his fence? It looks like a prison yard." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, letting her theatrics run their course. My fence was plain wood, nothing more, nothing less, perfectly within city regulations. When the noise subsided, I spoke in a calm, level tone. "My property is outside your HOA. Your authority stops at the boundary line." The silence that followed was almost satisfying, but then I saw it, the tight clench of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. She wasn't just offended. She was enraged at the reminder that there were limits to her power. Karen's next attack was more insidious. One morning, I found a crisp envelope taped to my front door. Inside was an invoice for $3,500, allegedly for street maintenance fees. The letter threatened legal action if I did not comply. I laughed under my breath as I studied the paper, slipping it neatly into a growing folder labeled Karen. Each fabricated bill, each fake notice, was a thread in the net she was weaving around herself. That evening, as I stepped outside to water the grass, Karen appeared across the lawn, arms folded, her oversized bracelet gleaming in the sunlight. "Ignoring bills won't make them go away," she sneered. I met her stare and replied softly, "Neither will faking them." For a fleeting moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face, but she quickly disguised it with another smug smile. Still, the crack in her confidence was there, and I filed that observation away with everything else. By the fifth attack, subtlety was gone. Late one Saturday night, I woke to the guttural roar of engines and the crash of metal cans. Rushing outside barefoot, I found 2 trucks blocking my driveway. Garbage bags, split and reeking, were scattered across my yard. A group of men leaned out of the windows, laughing before peeling off into the night. My eyes tracked upward, and there she was, Karen, standing in her bay window, arms crossed, a faint smirk twisting her painted lips. She wanted me to lose control, to explode in anger, to give her something she could twist into proof of her lies. Instead, I pulled out my phone, documenting every detail, the plates of the trucks, the spilled trash, and yes, even her silhouette watching like a queen proud of her jesters. When I cleaned up the mess the next morning, I did it methodically, piece by piece, while neighbors peeked from their blinds. Let them see. I didn't need to shout. Silence could be louder than rage. But the most painful strike came not from Karen herself, but from the community she poisoned. One afternoon, a basketball rolled onto my lawn, chased by a boy no older than 10. I bent down, scooped it up, and smiled, holding it out. Before the boy could take it, his mother screamed from across the street, "Leave it! Don't touch it!" She grabbed her son, pulling him away as if my very touch might curse him. The ball sat abandoned on the edge of my grass for 2 full days until it vanished in the dark. I stood at my window that first night, watching it sit there under the streetlight, and realized just how far Karen's influence had spread. She wasn't just trying to destroy me. She wanted to erase my humanity in their eyes. Yet in that isolation, something inside me sharpened. I had endured worse campaigns of lies, orchestrated by people far more dangerous than a suburban tyrant with too much time and too little conscience. My hands moved almost automatically as I catalogued her letters, cross-referenced dates, and compared her false invoices. The old military watch on my wrist ticked steadily, an anchor to a past I rarely let surface. The instincts I thought I had buried long ago were alive again. I found myself scanning license plates without thinking, memorizing the order of vehicles passing down the street, even tracking the times Karen's lights went on and off each night. It was not paranoia, it was training resurfacing. Karen believed she was wearing me down, grinding me into submission. What she didn't realize was that every move she made only tightened the noose around her own neck. Each fake violation, each whispered rumor, each humiliation was evidence I would use. And beneath my calm exterior, a storm gathered strength. Because what Karen didn't know, what no one in this neighborhood suspected, was that I hadn't stumbled here by accident. I had chosen this house, this street, this battle, and the game she thought she was winning was the one I had come here to end. I had taken enough hits. Karen thought I was just another weary homeowner who would eventually crumble under the weight of her harassment. What she didn't realize was that every move she made only sharpened my resolve. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Anger clouds judgment, but focus builds cases. My first move was filing a formal complaint with the county clerk's office about harassment and fraudulent notices. It felt almost ceremonial, watching the clerk stamp the papers and slide them into an official file. Bureaucracy is slow, but once it starts rolling, it's like a heavy train, hard to stop and guaranteed to leave tracks. After that, I turned my house into something more than a home. It became a command post. Small cameras hidden in plain sight blended into motion lights and birdhouses. They captured everything. The men who dumped trash in my yard, the trucks that blocked my driveway, the mysterious envelopes taped to my door. I even installed a mic under the porch, sensitive enough to pick up whispered conversations near my mailbox. Night after night, I sat at my desk, reviewing footage, cataloging events, building a timeline. I cross-referenced license plates, mapped out dates and times, and found patterns Karen herself didn't realize she had created. Her operations were sloppy, predictable. She liked Friday nights, usually after 8, when she thought people were too tired or distracted to notice. She used the same group of hired thugs men with criminal records easy enough to trace once I knew where to look. The more evidence I gathered, the more confident I became. And yet, in the quiet hours of those long nights, I felt something stirring in me I hadn't felt in years. Old instincts, old habits. My eyes automatically scanned vehicles as they drove by. I memorized plate numbers without writing them down. I built profiles of her associates like I used to do with targets in bigger, darker cases. It wasn't just a defense anymore. It was an investigation, and I knew exactly where it was heading. Then came the night Paul showed up. I heard the knock around 10, soft but persistent, like a man trying not to be noticed. When I opened the door, he stood there with slumped shoulders, thinning grey hair, glasses sliding down his nose. He looked like a man carrying more weight than his frame was built for. "I'm Paul," he said quietly, "Karen's husband." His eyes darted across the street before he stepped inside, like a fugitive afraid of being seen. We sat at my kitchen table, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, he slid a manila envelope across the table. "I can't keep pretending I don't know what she's doing," he whispered. Inside the envelope were HOA financial records, ledgers, invoices, bank statements, the kind of documents Karen would never imagine leaving in someone else's hands. I flipped through the pages slowly, each line of numbers telling a story. Overbilled landscaping, duplicate charges for streetlights that had never been replaced, maintenance projects that existed only on paper, tens of thousands of dollars siphoned quietly into accounts that circled back to her name. "She's been stealing from them for years," Paul admitted, his voice breaking. "I've tried to confront her, but she doesn't listen. Maybe you can make her stop." He looked at me, desperate, like a man who had been drowning for decades and had just spotted dry land. I closed the folder gently. "You've done the right thing, Paul," I said. "This ends now." For the first time, he let out a breath that sounded like relief, though faint and cautious, as if he barely believed it himself. From that moment, the puzzle pieces snapped into place. Karen wasn't just a bully with too much time on her hands, she was an embezzler running her little empire like a private bank. And now I had the evidence to prove it. But I knew going public too soon would be reckless. I needed to set the stage carefully, so that when the curtain fell, it wouldn't just be dramatic, it would be final. The following week, Karen tried again to humiliate me. She stormed up to my driveway while I was working on my car, waving another fabricated invoice. "You think you're smart, don't you?" she hissed. "But this community has rules, and I'll make sure you pay every dime you owe." I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on a rag, and met her glare with calm amusement. "Karen," I said softly, "you should be careful. Sometimes when people dig holes for others, they end up falling in themselves." She blinked, caught off guard, then recovered with a scoff. But I saw it, that flicker of unease she couldn't quite mask. She was starting to sense that I wasn't just any neighbor. Behind the scenes, I gathered more ammunition. I filed open records requests at City Hall, pulling permits, tax filings, and public contracts related to the HOA. The clerk processing my forms raised an eyebrow at the precision of my requests. "You've done this before," she remarked casually. I smiled faintly. "Something like that." The truth was, I had spent over 15 years as a federal investigator specializing in financial crimes. Embezzlement, fraud, money laundering. I'd chased them all across boardrooms and back alleys. I had thought I'd left that life behind when I retired early, craving quiet after years of chasing shadows. But standing in Karen's kingdom, watching her terrorize neighbors and line her pockets, I realized I hadn't left those skills behind. I had simply been waiting for a reason to use them again. The turning point came at the next HOA meeting. The community hall was packed, the air buzzing with idle chatter. Karen stood at the front like she always did, floral dress bright under the fluorescent lights, scarf tied dramatically at her throat. She clutched another set of papers, waving them with theatrical flourish. "This man," she declared, pointing straight at me, "is a parasite. He refuses to pay his dues, he violates our standards, and he drags down our property values. The crowd murmured, many nodding along out of habit, too conditioned by years of her authority to question her word. I waited until the noise reached its peak, then rose calmly from my chair. I held a slim folder in my hands, no thicker than a magazine, but heavy with the weight of truth. "If you'll allow me," I said evenly, "I have a few documents of my own to share." Karen's smirk faltered. I started simple. My property deed, stamped and notarized, proving beyond a doubt that my house was outside HOA jurisdiction. Murmurs spread. Then I revealed photographs and video clips. Men dumping garbage on my lawn, trucks blocking my driveway, Karen herself visible in the window as it all unfolded. Gasps rippled through the room. Finally, I laid out the financial records, highlighted entries showing duplicate charges, fake maintenance projects, and funds redirected into Karen's personal accounts. The silence was electric, the kind that holds a crowd in collective disbelief. "This isn't negligence," I said, my voice steady. "It's theft. Year after year, your dues have been siphoned away. And the person responsible is the very one standing here pretending to protect you." Karen lunged forward, trying to grab the papers, but I pulled them back effortlessly. "Did you really think," I whispered, loud enough for the front row to hear, "that I was just some random homeowner? I spent my career investigating people exactly like you. And compared to them, Karen, you're not even clever." Her face drained of color, the mask of control slipping for the first time. The crowd erupted, neighbors shouting questions, accusations, grievances that had been bottled up for years. The queen of the HOA had been unmasked, and the empire she thought was unshakable was crumbling before her eyes. The night of the big HOA meeting felt different from the others. There was an electricity in the air, a hum of expectation that even Karen couldn't control. The community hall, usually half full with bored residents, was packed to the brim. Dozens of neighbors crowded into the folding chairs, some standing along the back wall. I noticed a few unfamiliar faces, reporters clutching notepads and camera crews setting up tripods near the side. Word had spread about the corruption, the harassment, the investigation, and tonight would be the reckoning. Karen walked in like a queen entering her throne room. Her floral dress was louder than ever, the red silk scarf knotted high at her neck, as if it were part of some royal regalia. She smiled broadly, waving as if she were greeting loyal subjects, but I could see the stiffness in her movements, the tightness around her eyes. She was rattled, even if she refused to show it. Paul trailed behind her, shoulders slumped, his face pale and expressionless. He didn't sit beside her. He found a seat near the back, next to a neighbor I recognized, and kept his gaze fixed on the floor. Karen called the meeting to order with her usual flair, banging the gavel against the podium. "Thank you everyone for coming," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "Tonight, we address a threat to our community, an outsider who refuses to follow our rules and who seeks to tear apart everything we've built." Her eyes locked on me, filled with venom. She gestured dramatically. "This man has mocked our authority, ignored our bylaws, and poisoned our unity. He claims he is above us, but I promise you, no one is above the HOA. There was scattered applause, but it was half-hearted, tinged with uncertainty. The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicking. Karen basked in the spotlight, mistaking the flashes for admiration rather than scrutiny. She launched into a tirade, waving invoices, pointing fingers, piling accusation upon accusation. To the untrained ear, it might have sounded convincing, but to a room already seeded with doubt, it rang hollow. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I stood. The room went quiet. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights above. I walked slowly to the front, the slim black folder under my arm. Karen tried to block me with her body at the podium, but I stopped short, facing the crowd. "May I?" I asked calmly. The moderator, a weary man who had served on the HOA board for years, nodded reluctantly. "Go ahead." I placed the folder on the podium, opened it, and drew out the first document. "This," I said, holding it up so the nearest row could see, is my property deed, stamped, notarized, and filed with the county. My property is outside HOA jurisdiction. Every notice Karen has taped to my door, every invoice she has waved in my face, it has no legal standing. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some gasped. Others nodded, eyes widening. Before Karen could cut in, I slid a USB drive into the projector connected to the hall's screen. Grainy footage appeared, captured from my porch cameras. The crowd watched as men dumped garbage across my driveway, blocked my entrance with trucks, and vandalized my fence. The timestamps and license plates were clear, impossible to dispute. In one clip, Karen herself was visible in her bay window, arms crossed, smirking as the scene unfolded. A gasp rippled through the hall. Someone shouted, "That's her!" Karen rushed forward, slamming the projector off, but the damage was done. Too many people had seen. "That footage is fake," she screamed, her voice cracking. "He doctored it. He's trying to frame me." I let her rant, then pulled out the financial records. The room fell silent again as I laid the pages on the podium, highlighting duplicated charges, inflated costs, and projects billed but never completed. "For years," I said, my voice steady, "your dues have been stolen. Thousands of dollars, diverted into accounts controlled by Karen. Landscaping that never happened. Street repairs that never took place. Every fine, every fee, it's been a con." The room erupted. Neighbors who had once whispered behind curtains now shouted openly. "I paid for that playground resurfacing," one woman cried. "And it never happened." Another man stood, red-faced. "You threatened to foreclose on my house for unpaid fees, Karen. Now I know why you needed more money to line your pockets." Voices overlapped, anger spilling out like a flood. The hall shook with outrage, years of resentment breaking free. Karen pounded the podium with her fist. "Lies. All lies. He's an outsider. He forged these records." But Paul stood slowly from his seat, his voice trembling yet clear. "No, Karen. They're real." The room hushed instantly. He stepped forward, his hands shaking as he held up a second set of documents. "I'm the one who gave them to him. I couldn't watch you do this anymore." His eyes glistened, his face drawn with sorrow. "You stole from them. From me. From all of us." Karen's face went white. For the first time, she looked cornered, stripped of her power. She lunged toward Paul, shrieking, "How dare you betray me!" But two uniformed officers entered the hall at that moment, their presence commanding silence. One stepped forward, holding a folded piece of paper. "Karen Whitfield," he said firmly, "we have a warrant for your arrest. Embezzlement, fraud, harassment, and misuse of HOA funds." "Yeah." The crowd gasped, then erupted into cheers. Karen flailed as the officers took her arms, her scarf slipping askew, her bracelet jangling wildly. "This is my community," she screamed, her voice cracking into a desperate wail. "You can't do this to me. I built this place. I am this place." But her words were drowned out by the roar of the crowd, voices raised not in fear but in triumph. Years of oppression had ended in a single night. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones extended. Neighbors shouted their grievances into the lenses, eager to tell their stories now that the spell of fear had been broken. "She fined me for painting my shutters the wrong shade of beige," one woman told a reporter. "I had to pay $1,500 because my grass was an inch too long," another man added. Each story piled onto the mountain of evidence, each voice adding to the chorus of outrage. I stood back, watching it unfold, the folder still in my hands. For months, I had endured her games, her lies, her attempts to break me. Tonight, the tables had turned. But I knew this wasn't just about me. It was about all of them, every neighbor who had lived under her thumb, too afraid to speak, too beaten down to resist. Tonight wasn't just justice for me. It was justice for an entire community. And then, when the noise reached its peak, I stepped forward one last time. "There's something you all should know," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. The room hushed, eyes turning toward me. I let the silence stretch before I continued. I didn't buy this house by accident. I came here on purpose. My name isn't just John Miller, the quiet guy who moved in next door. For 15 years, I was a federal investigator specializing in financial crimes, and Karen Whitfield has just been my latest case. The room gasped. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some neighbors stared at me with shock, others with dawning admiration. I let the truth sink in, the weight of it pressing into the air. I came here because I knew what she was doing. I just needed proof. And with your help, I got it. The officers led Karen out, her screams echoing down the hall, fading into the night. The residents cheered, some clapping, others crying, the mixture of relief and vindication washing over them. Paul sat quietly in the corner, his face buried in his hands. He wasn't cheering. He was grieving. Not for her crimes, but for the years of silence that had made them possible. As the reporters swarmed, neighbors crowded around me. "Thank you," one said, gripping my hand. "We never thought anyone could stop her." Another woman, tears in her eyes, whispered, "You saved us." I shook my head gently. "No," I told them. "You saved yourselves. You just needed someone to remind you that bullies only win if we let them." That night, as I walked home under the glow of the streetlights, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, free. The weight Karen had pressed on every house, every family had lifted. And though I had revealed my past, I knew my role wasn't over yet. The fight was bigger than Karen. It was about ensuring no one else would rise to take her place. Karen's screams still echoed in my ears long after the patrol car carried her away. Even with her wrists cuffed and her empire crumbling, she had fought like a cornered animal, insisting she was untouchable. But the truth had finally caught up to her, and the community she once ruled with an iron fist had watched her fall. For the first time since moving in, I walked home without feeling eyes filled with suspicion on my back. Instead, neighbors lingered outside, whispering to each other with relief and astonishment. The spell of fear was broken, and people were finally free to speak. The very next day, the county froze the HOA's accounts pending investigation. Projects that had been nothing more than padding for Karen's pockets were halted, exposing just how thinly stretched her lies had been. For years, residents had paid thousands in fines and fees, believing they were keeping their neighborhood pristine. Now they realized they had been funding Karen's luxury vacations, her jewelry, her endless parade of floral dresses and scarves. The betrayal cut deep. But with betrayal also came unity. Neighbors who had once avoided me now approached my porch with hesitant smiles. The father who used to cross the street with his son stopped by, apologizing for believing the rumors. "I should have known better," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve that." His son clutched a basketball to his chest, finally brave enough to ask if I wanted to shoot hoops with him sometime. The woman who had screamed at her boy to leave the ball on my lawn brought over a pie as a peace offering, her eyes wet with regret. "We were scared," she admitted. "Karen made us believe you were dangerous." I accepted the pie with a nod, not out of hunger, but because it symbolized something greater than dessert. It was trust returning, slowly but surely. Meanwhile, the investigation into Karen's crimes snowballed. Reporters dug deeper, uncovering years of embezzlement that stretched far beyond the HOA. She had set up shell accounts, funneled money through bogus contractors, and manipulated bylaws to maintain absolute control. The charges against her multiplied fraud, tax evasion, harassment, abuse of power. Each day brought new revelations, each more damning than the last. Her name became synonymous with corruption in local headlines. Once feared, she was now ridiculed, a cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. The community wasted no time organizing a new election. For the first time, real transparency was on the ballot. Candidates promised open books, rotating leadership, and an end to predatory fines. On election day, the turnout was higher than anyone could remember. People who had once shrugged and accepted Karen's rule as inevitable now stood proudly, casting their votes with determination. When the results were announced, a cheer rose through the neighborhood. A new board was elected, one built on fairness, not fear. I kept my distance from the campaign, choosing instead to watch from the sidelines. I hadn't moved here to run an HOA. I had come to expose the rot at its core. But when the new board president visited me personally to thank me, she made an offer I hadn't expected. "You have experience we don't," she said earnestly. "We'd like you to stay involved. Maybe not as a board member, but as an advisor, someone who can keep us honest." I hesitated. I hadn't wanted to be anyone's savior. I just wanted to live quietly, maybe even forget the years I had spent digging through financial crimes and chasing liars across the country. But looking at the relief in her eyes, I realized that stepping back completely would feel like abandonment. This community had fought to reclaim its freedom, and if I could help them keep it, perhaps it was worth staying connected. One moment in particular etched itself into my memory. A little girl, no older than 8, tugged on her mother's sleeve as they passed my yard. "Do we have to move any more, Mummy?" she asked. Her mother knelt, tears welling in her eyes. "No, honey," she whispered, hugging her daughter tightly. "We're safe now." I turned away to give them privacy, but the words sank deep into my chest. Safe. That was what this had been about all along. Not money, not power safety. A community that no longer had to live in fear of a tyrant knocking on their door with threats and lies. Weeks later, when the trial began, I was called to testify. Standing in the courtroom, I laid out the evidence piece by piece, videos, documents, financial records. Karen sat at the defense table, her once bright clothes now dull, her makeup failing to hide the exhaustion etched into her face. She glared at me with the same venom as before, but this time it was powerless. Each word I spoke dismantled her story further, until even her lawyer looked weary of the charade. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all major counts. The sentence: years in prison, restitution for the stolen funds, and permanent removal from any position of community authority. When the verdict was read, the courtroom filled with a quiet sigh of relief, as if the entire neighborhood had been holding its breath for months. Karen's shriek of protest echoed off the walls, but no one listened. Justice had been served, and her reign was finally over. Life in the neighborhood slowly settled into something resembling normalcy. Children played outside again, neighbors waved without hesitation, and community events no longer felt like political rallies. The scars Karen left behind would take time to heal, but healing had begun. I was invited to barbecues, asked to join pickup basketball games, even approached about teaching a financial literacy class at the local community center. For a man who had once been cast as the villain, it was strange to feel like a pillar. One evening, as the sun set over the rooftops, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the community gathered in the park for a celebration. A banner hung across the gazebo. New beginnings. Families laughed. Children ran through sprinklers, and the smell of grilled food filled the air. I stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in my pockets, content to watch. Then someone called my name, and suddenly I was pulled into the center, neighbors clapping me on the back, thanking me once again. I raised my hands to quiet them. "I appreciate the thanks," I said, my voice carrying in the warm evening air. "But remember, this isn't about me. This is about you. This land, these homes, this community, it belongs to all of you. Never let anyone take that from you again." The crowd erupted in cheers, but I didn't linger in the spotlight. Instead, I stepped back, letting them celebrate their victory, their freedom. The true legacy wasn't my involvement. It was their courage, their unity, their refusal to ever again bow to someone like Karen. Later, as the last of the party wound down and the park grew quiet, I walked home under the fading light. My old military watch ticked steadily on my wrist, marking time as it always had. For years, I had chased justice in faraway places, for strangers I would never meet again. Tonight, justice had found a home right next door, and as I stood on my porch, the house no longer felt like just a house. It felt like a symbol, a reminder carved into the heart of the neighborhood. Bullies can fall, corruption can be exposed, and even the loudest tyrant can be silenced when people choose courage over fear. That was the legacy Karen left behind. Not her empire, but her downfall. I took a deep breath of the cool night air, the quiet street stretching out before me. For the first time, it truly felt like home.